Sarah Martinez stood in the marble-floored lobby of the prestigious Grandview Country Club, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished surface. She clutched a folder containing her business proposal, her palms sweaty despite the air conditioning. The 26-year-old had worked 3 jobs to save enough money just to attend this networking event, hoping to find investors for her revolutionary water purification technology. The elegant women around her wore designer dresses and jewelry that probably cost more than Sarah's annual rent. Their conversations filled with talk of European vacations, charity galas, and stock portfolios. Sarah felt completely out of place, but she reminded herself why she was there. Her invention could provide clean drinking water to millions of people in developing countries, and she needed funding to make it happen. Margaret Blackwell, the club's social coordinator and wife of a prominent real estate mogul, noticed Sarah immediately. Her sharp eyes took in Sarah's simple black dress from a discount store, her modest handbag, and her nervous demeanor. Margaret whispered something to her circle of friends, and they all turned to stare at Sarah with barely concealed disdain. "Excuse me, dear." Margaret approached with a condescending smile. "I think you might be lost. The staff entrance is around the back of the building." Her voice carried clearly across the lobby, causing several other guests to turn and look. Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she stood her ground. "Actually, I'm here for the networking event. I'm Sarah Martinez from Aquatech Solutions." She extended her hand politely, but Margaret didn't take it. Instead, she looked Sarah up and down with obvious disapproval. "Oh my," Margaret laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Well, I suppose they're letting anyone in these days. Though I have to say, your appearance is rather unfortunate for such an exclusive gathering. Perhaps you should consider the country club's housekeeping positions instead. They're always looking for help in the kitchen." The other women tittered behind their champagne flutes. Sarah felt her face flush hot with shame and anger. She had anticipated skepticism about her business idea, even rejection from potential investors, but she hadn't expected this level of cruel snobbery based solely on her appearance and background. "I'm not here looking for a job cleaning," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm here to present a business opportunity that could change the world." She held up her folder. "I've developed a water purification system that costs 90% less than current technology, while being twice as effective." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "How amusing. And I suppose you think these distinguished gentlemen and ladies should take financial advice from someone who clearly can't even afford proper attire." She gestured dismissively at Sarah's outfit. "My dear, success requires a certain breeding, a certain class that simply cannot be taught. You might have some clever little gadget, but business at this level requires connections, refinement, and quite frankly, the right family background." The conversation had drawn a small crowd. Sarah noticed several potential investors watching with interest, though whether they were interested in her business or the unfolding drama, she couldn't tell. Her heart pounded, but something inside her refused to back down. "With respect, Mrs. Blackwell, I believe results matter more than appearances. My technology has been tested by 3 independent laboratories, and the results speak for themselves." Sarah opened her folder and pulled out a photograph showing children in a remote village drinking clean water from her portable purification unit. "These children in Guatemala are alive today because of my invention, not because I wear the right dress or belong to the right family." Margaret's face hardened. "How presumptuous. You clearly don't understand how things work in the real world of serious business. Perhaps you should stick to your little charity projects and leave the big business to those of us who actually understand it." She turned to her friends with an exaggerated sigh. "Really, the naivety of some people never ceases to amaze me." Sarah felt tears threatening, but she blinked them back. She had faced rejection before, but never such cruel personal humiliation. The other guests were now openly staring, some with pity, others with the uncomfortable fascination people have for public embarrassment. Sarah realized that Margaret was intentionally making a spectacle of her, using her as entertainment for the other club members. "I may not have your background or your wardrobe," Sarah said quietly, "but I have something you don't. I have a solution to a problem that affects 2 billion people worldwide, and I have the determination to see it through, regardless of what anyone thinks of my appearance." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "Determination without connections is just delusion, my dear. Now, if you'll excuse us, the adults have serious matters to discuss." She turned her back on Sarah deliberately, effectively dismissing her from the conversation in the social circle. Sarah stood alone in the middle of the opulent lobby, her face burning with humiliation. Several people continued to stare, whispering among themselves. She had never felt so small, so insignificant. The marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and oil paintings on the walls seemed to mock her presence. Everything about the place screamed wealth and exclusivity, and she clearly didn't belong. But as Sarah walked toward the exit, her initial shame began transforming into something else entirely. Anger. Not just at Margaret's cruelty, but at a system that judged people's worth based on their clothing and connections, rather than their ideas and potential. She stopped just short of the door, turned around, and looked back at Margaret holding court with her circle of privileged friends. "You're right about one thing," Sarah called out, her voice carrying clearly across the lobby. "This conversation is definitely something I'll remember." Her words were calm, but there was steel beneath them. Margaret looked back with surprise, not expecting the supposedly defeated young woman to speak again. Sarah walked out into the humid evening air, her folder still clutched tightly in her hand. She sat in her old Honda Civic for several minutes, processing what had just happened. The humiliation stung, but underneath it was a burning determination she had never felt before. Margaret Blackwell and her elite friends had made a crucial mistake. They had underestimated her completely. Sarah returned to her cramped studio apartment above a convenience store, the events of the evening replaying in her mind like a broken record. She threw her folder onto the rickety kitchen table and stared at her reflection in the dark window. Margaret's words echoed in her head. Determination without connections is just delusion. The cruel assessment cut deep because Sarah knew there was some truth to it. She had been trying to secure funding for her water purification technology for over 2 years. Her invention could produce clean drinking water using solar power and a revolutionary filtration system that cost a fraction of existing methods. Laboratory tests proved its effectiveness, and field trials in Guatemala had shown remarkable results. Yet every meeting with potential investors ended the same way: polite interest followed by rejection. The next morning, Sarah dragged herself to her day job at a local engineering firm where she worked as a junior designer. Her boss, Mr. Henderson, was a decent man who allowed her flexible hours to pursue her own projects, but the salary barely covered her basic expenses. She spent her lunch breaks in the company's small conference room, making calls to potential investors and writing grant applications. "Martinez, you've got another call," her coworker Jake announced, covering the phone receiver with his hand. "Sounds like another one of your water thing meetings." There was no malice in his voice, but Sarah detected the same skepticism she had been hearing for months. Even her colleagues, who saw her work ethic and technical skills daily, seemed to doubt her ability to build a real business. The caller was Dr. Jennifer Walsh from a nonprofit focused on global water access. Sarah had submitted her technology for consideration for a small grant program. "I'm afraid we've decided to go with a more established company," Dr. Walsh explained. "Your technology shows promise, but we need organizations with proven track records and existing infrastructure." Sarah hung up the phone and put her head in her hands. It was the same story everywhere. Investors wanted companies with experience, but she couldn't get experience without investors. Banks required collateral she didn't have. Government grants went to universities and established corporations. She was trapped in an endless cycle of rejection. That evening, Sarah worked her second job waiting tables at a family restaurant downtown. The tips helped pay for her patent applications and prototype materials, but the work was exhausting. Her feet ached in her worn shoes as she served families their dinner, forcing smiles while her mind raced with business plans and technical calculations. During her break, she sat in the restaurant's back alley, scrolling through LinkedIn on her cracked phone screen. She watched her former engineering school classmates posting about promotions at major corporations, new houses, and successful projects. Sarah felt a stab of envy, quickly followed by self-doubt. Maybe she was deluding herself. Maybe Margaret had been right. Her third job was cleaning office buildings on weekends. The irony wasn't lost on her. Margaret had suggested she should look for cleaning work, and here she was mopping floors to fund her dreams. But as she cleaned the offices of successful businesses, Sarah studied how they operated. She read the documents left on desks, observed their organizational structures, and learned about their operations. One Saturday morning, while cleaning the offices of a venture capital firm, Sarah discovered something interesting. The partners had left notes from a meeting about water technology investments scattered across a conference table. She read them carefully while emptying trash cans, learning about market projections, competitor analysis, and investment criteria she had never considered. The notes revealed that major investors were actively seeking breakthrough technologies in water purification, but they were focusing on companies that could demonstrate scalability and market penetration strategies. Sarah realized she had been approaching investors with technical specifications instead of business solutions. She had been speaking like an engineer when she needed to think like an entrepreneur. That revelation sparked something in Sarah. She began spending her limited free time differently. Instead of perfecting her technology further, she focused on understanding business strategy. She read every article she could find about successful startups, studied case histories of companies that had scaled from nothing to major market players, and analyzed why some inventors succeeded while others failed. Sarah also started reaching out to successful entrepreneurs through social media and email. Most ignored her messages, but a few responded with brief advice. A tech entrepreneur from California told her that the biggest mistake inventors make is falling in love with their technology instead of their customers. A water industry executive from Texas explained that breakthrough innovations mean nothing without distribution channels and market access. The feedback was valuable, but it also highlighted how much Sarah didn't know about building a business. She felt overwhelmed by the complexity of scaling a company from concept to market success. Every solution seemed to require resources she didn't have or expertise she lacked. The gap between her current situation and her goals seemed insurmountable. 3 months after the humiliating encounter at the country club, Sarah found herself working late at the engineering firm, using their internet to research potential international markets for her technology. She had identified several countries where water access was a critical need and where government agencies might be interested in low-cost solutions. As she worked, Sarah thought about Margaret's dismissive comments about her little charity projects. The wealthy woman had meant it as an insult, but Sarah began to see it differently. What if charity work and social impact weren't obstacles to business success? What if they were actually advantages in certain markets? Sarah stayed up all night researching social impact investing, benefit corporations, and the growing trend of mission-driven businesses. She discovered that many investors were increasingly interested in companies that generated both profit and positive social impact. Her technology's potential to provide clean water to underserved populations wasn't a limitation. It was a unique selling proposition. For the first time in months, Sarah felt genuinely hopeful. She wasn't just an inventor with a clever device. She was a social entrepreneur with a solution to a global crisis. The realization changed how she thought about her business, her target customers, and her path to success. Margaret had been wrong about many things, but she had been right about one crucial point. Sarah did need to think bigger. Sarah printed out everything she had researched, organized it into a new business plan, and began preparing for what she hoped would be a very different kind of investor meeting. She had learned hard lessons about preparation, presentation, and understanding her audience. This time she would be ready. Sarah spent the following weeks transforming everything about her approach. She traded her worn sneakers for professional flats from a thrift store and practiced her presentation in the mirror until she could deliver it without notes. But the real change was deeper than appearance. She had fundamentally shifted from thinking like an inventor to thinking like a CEO. Her breakthrough came when she discovered that several major corporations had corporate social responsibility initiatives with specific goals for global water access. Instead of approaching traditional venture capitalists who wanted quick returns, Sarah began targeting companies that needed to demonstrate social impact to their shareholders and customers. The first company to respond was Meridian Industries, a Fortune 500 manufacturer with a stated commitment to sustainable development goals. Their corporate foundation had allocated $50 million for water access projects over the next 5 years. But they were struggling to find scalable solutions that could demonstrate measurable impact. David Chen, Meridian's director of social impact initiatives, agreed to meet with Sarah at the company's regional headquarters. Unlike the country club crowd, Chen was a working professional who had built his career on identifying and implementing effective social programs. He was more interested in results than pedigree. Sarah arrived at Meridian's offices with a completely different presentation than she had prepared for traditional investors. Instead of leading with technical specifications, she opened with stark statistics about global water scarcity and its economic impact. She showed photographs from her Guatemala field trials, complete with data on reduced illness rates and improved school attendance among children who had access to clean water. "The technology is impressive," Chen said after reviewing her materials. "But I'm more interested in your implementation strategy. How do you plan to scale this beyond small village demonstrations?" Sarah was ready for the question. She had spent weeks developing a comprehensive deployment model that addressed manufacturing, distribution, training, and maintenance. "We partner with local organizations that already have community trust and infrastructure," she explained. "Instead of trying to build everything from scratch, we leverage existing networks to multiply our impact." She showed Chen her analysis of potential partner organizations in 12 countries, complete with contact information for regional directors who had already expressed interest in pilot programs. Sarah had spent countless hours researching and reaching out to international aid organizations, government agencies, and local nonprofits. "The key is sustainable implementation," Sarah continued. "We don't just drop off equipment and leave. We train local technicians, establish supply chains for replacement parts, and create monitoring systems to track long-term performance. Every installation becomes a foundation for expanding to neighboring communities." Chen was intrigued, but he had concerns about scale and cost. $50 million sounds like a lot of money, but it needs to reach hundreds of thousands of people to justify the investment. "Can your technology really achieve that level of impact?" Sarah had anticipated this question too. She pulled out detailed financial projections showing how economies of scale would reduce per-unit costs as production increased. "Our manufacturing partners in Malaysia can produce units for $200 each, at volumes above 10,000 units annually. At that price point, we can provide clean water access to families for less than 20 cents per person per month." The numbers were compelling, but Chen needed more than projections. He wanted proof that Sarah could execute at scale. "What's your management experience? Have you ever run operations of this size?" This was the question Sarah had dreaded, but she had prepared for it carefully. "I don't have traditional corporate management experience," she admitted. "But I've spent 2 years building every aspect of this business from the ground up. I've handled everything from patent applications to field testing to partnership development. Most importantly, I understand both the technical and human sides of this challenge." Sarah then did something unexpected. She pulled out testimonials from community leaders in Guatemala who had worked with her during the field trials. "Maria Santos leads a women's cooperative that now maintains and operates 5 of our units serving over 300 families. She's trained 12 other women as technicians, and they're generating income by expanding the program to neighboring villages." The testimonials revealed something Chen hadn't expected. Sarah hadn't just invented a device. She had developed a complete social enterprise model. The Guatemalan women weren't just users of her technology. They were partners in its deployment and expansion. "You've created a franchise model," Chen observed with growing interest. "Local entrepreneurs can build businesses around your technology while serving their communities." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "It's sustainable because it creates economic opportunity, not just dependency. The more successful our local partners become, the faster the technology spreads and the more communities we serve." Chen was impressed, but Meridian required board approval for investments over $1 million. Sarah would need to present to the full corporate foundation board, which included several executives who moved in the same social circles as Margaret Blackwell. "I have to warn you," Chen said as the meeting concluded. "The board members are very traditional in their thinking. They prefer to fund established organizations with proven track records. You'll need to convince them that you're not just a good cause but a sound investment." Sarah understood the challenge, but she felt confident for the first time in months. She had data, partnerships, testimonials, and a clear implementation strategy. More importantly, she had learned to speak the language of business impact rather than just technical innovation. Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah prepared for the board presentation with the same intensity she had once devoted to perfecting her technology. She researched each board member's background and interests, prepared answers to every possible objection, and developed contingency plans for different funding scenarios. The night before the presentation, Sarah laid out her best professional outfit, still modest by Margaret's standards, but appropriate for a serious business meeting. She reviewed her presentation one final time, focusing on the key message that had emerged from her strategic pivot. She wasn't asking for charity. She was offering an opportunity to achieve both social impact and financial sustainability. Sarah realized that Margaret's harsh rejection had actually been a gift. It had forced her to develop the business skills and strategic thinking she lacked as a pure inventor. The humiliation at the country club had been painful, but it had ultimately made her a better entrepreneur. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. From the crushing embarrassment of being dismissed as naive and unsuitable, she had built real partnerships, developed genuine expertise, and created a viable business model. Tomorrow's presentation would determine whether all that work would translate into the funding she needed to change millions of lives. The Meridian Industries boardroom was everything Sarah had expected. Polished mahogany table, leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. 8 board members sat around the table, their expensive suits and confident postures reminding Sarah uncomfortably of the country club crowd that had dismissed her months earlier. Sarah recognized several faces from business magazines and social pages. Board chair Elizabeth Hartwell had inherited her family's manufacturing fortune and served on multiple corporate boards. Thomas Bradford owned a chain of luxury hotels and was known for his conservative investment philosophy. Most intimidating of all was Victoria Sterling, a prominent investment banker who had built her reputation on skeptical due diligence and harsh questioning of funding proposals. "Ms. Martinez," Hartwell began formally, "Mr. Chen has provided us with your materials, and while your technology appears promising, we have significant concerns about entrusting $50 million to someone with no management experience or corporate track record." Sarah had expected this opening. Instead of becoming defensive, she acknowledged the concern directly. "You're absolutely right to question my experience running large-scale operations. That's exactly why I've spent the past year building partnerships with organizations that do have that experience." She activated her laptop and projected a world map showing partnership agreements with established nonprofits, government agencies, and local organizations across 15 countries. "I'm not asking you to trust me to manage $50 million alone. I'm asking you to invest in a proven network of partners who already have the infrastructure, relationships, and expertise to implement this technology at scale." Bradford leaned forward skeptically. "Partnerships sound good in theory, but how do you maintain quality control and accountability when you're working with dozens of different organizations across multiple continents?" Sarah clicked to her next slide, revealing a comprehensive monitoring and evaluation system she had developed with help from her Guatemala partners. Every installation includes digital monitoring equipment that provides real-time data on water quality, usage patterns, and maintenance needs. Partners report monthly metrics through a standardized dashboard that tracks both technical performance and social impact. She showed actual data from her existing installations, graphs displaying water quality measurements, photographs of communities using the technology, and testimonials from local health officials documenting reduced illness rates. This isn't theoretical. These systems are already operating successfully, and we have 18 months of performance data to validate our approach. Victoria Sterling, who had been quietly reviewing financial projections, looked up with sharp eyes. "Your cost estimates assume significant economies of scale, but you're asking us to fund a 50-fold expansion from your current operations. How do we know your unit costs won't inflate dramatically as you scale up?" This was the question Sarah had spent weeks preparing for. "We've already negotiated manufacturing contracts with 3 different suppliers in Malaysia and Mexico. Each has committed to specific pricing tiers based on volume, with penalty clauses if they fail to meet cost targets." She distributed detailed manufacturing agreements that included binding price commitments and quality specifications. "Additionally," Sarah continued, "we've identified backup suppliers in case any primary manufacturer faces production issues. The competitive pressure between suppliers actually helps keep costs down as we scale." The board members exchanged glances, clearly impressed by the thoroughness of her preparation. Sarah had learned from her early investor meetings that detailed planning and risk mitigation were just as important as innovative technology. Hartwell raised another concern. Even with solid partnerships and manufacturing agreements, international development projects face significant political and logistical challenges. How do you plan to navigate government regulations, customs procedures, and potential political instability in your target markets? Sarah had anticipated this question too. 3 of our key partners are international organizations with decades of experience in these markets. They handle government relations, customs procedures, and local compliance issues. We provide the technology and training. They manage the political and logistical complexities. She displayed partnership agreements with established aid organizations that had been operating successfully in challenging environments for years. These partners need innovative, cost-effective technologies to achieve their mission goals. We need their expertise and infrastructure to reach communities that need clean water. It's a mutually beneficial relationship that reduces risk for everyone involved. The questioning continued for another hour, covering everything from intellectual property protection to competitive threats to long-term sustainability. Sarah answered each question with specific data, documented partnerships, and concrete implementation plans. The months of rejection and learning had prepared her well for this level of scrutiny. Finally, Sterling asked the most pointed question of all. Ms. Martinez, you're asking us to make the largest single investment in our foundation's history, based on technology developed by someone with no corporate experience. Why should we choose you over established companies that are also developing water purification solutions? Sarah paused, knowing this was the crucial moment. Because established companies are focused on markets where people can pay premium prices for water treatment. They're not interested in serving communities that can only afford low-cost solutions. I've spent 2 years living and working with the people who need this technology most. I understand their needs, their constraints, and their capabilities in ways that corporate research labs never will. She clicked to a final slide showing photographs from her Guatemala work, images of children drinking clean water, women learning to maintain and repair equipment, and communities celebrating new installations. The established companies you mentioned are excellent at serving wealthy customers, but they've never figured out how to make water purification profitable while serving the world's poorest communities. That's not a technology problem. It's a business model problem that requires different thinking. Sarah looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member. You have a choice. You can fund another incremental improvement to existing technology that serves customers who already have access to clean water. Or you can fund a breakthrough approach that creates sustainable solutions for the 2 billion people who don't. The question isn't whether I have traditional credentials. The question is whether you want to achieve traditional results or transformational impact. The room fell silent. Sarah could see board members considering her words, weighing her arguments against their instincts to play it safe with established organizations. She had made her case as effectively as possible, but now the decision was out of her hands. Bradford broke the silence. We'll need to discuss this privately and conduct additional due diligence. Mr. Chen will contact you with our decision within 2 weeks. As Sarah packed up her materials, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and cautious optimism. She had answered every question, addressed every concern, and presented her strongest possible case. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen, but she knew she had given everything she had to this opportunity. Walking to the parking garage, Sarah reflected on how different this meeting had been from her early investor presentations. She had learned to anticipate objections, prepare detailed responses, and speak the language of business rather than just technology. Most importantly, she had learned to position herself not as someone asking for help, but as someone offering a valuable opportunity. 2 weeks stretched into an eternity for Sarah. She continued working her 3 jobs while waiting for Meridian's decision, but her mind was constantly distracted. Every phone call made her heart race, wondering if it might be David Chen with news about the funding decision. On a Thursday morning, while Sarah was reviewing engineering plans at her day job, Chen finally called. Sarah, can you come in this afternoon? The board wants to meet with you again. Sarah's stomach dropped. A second meeting could mean they wanted to negotiate terms, or it could mean they had decided to reject her proposal, but wanted to deliver the news in person. She spent the drive to Meridian's offices trying to prepare mentally for either possibility. When Sarah arrived at the boardroom, the same 8 board members were seated around the table, but their expressions were unreadable. Elizabeth Hartwell gestured for Sarah to take a seat at the head of the table, a position that felt both honor and interrogation. Ms. Martinez, Hartwell began, we've completed our due diligence review of your proposal. We've spoken with your partners in Guatemala, verified your manufacturing agreements, and consulted with independent experts about your technology. Sarah's heart pounded as she waited for the verdict. The silence stretched uncomfortably long before Victoria Sterling leaned forward, with what might have been the beginning of a smile. We've decided to approve funding for your project, Sterling announced. However, not at the level you requested. Sarah felt her hopes deflate slightly. A partial funding offer might not be enough to achieve the scale needed to prove the business model's viability. We're prepared to invest $75 million over 3 years, Hartwell continued, with performance milestones that could trigger additional funding up to $150 million. Sarah's mind reeled. They weren't reducing her funding request. They were increasing it by 50%. She struggled to maintain her composure while processing the magnitude of what they had just offered. However, Bradford added, this investment comes with significant conditions. We'll require quarterly reporting, independent auditing of all operations, and board representation on your company's advisory council. Additionally, we want to see expansion to at least 8 countries within the first 18 months. Sarah nodded, still trying to absorb the reality of what was happening. Those conditions are completely reasonable. I welcome the oversight and accountability measures. Chen slid a thick folder across the table. Here are the detailed terms and conditions. Take time to review everything with legal counsel before you sign anything. This is a partnership, not just a funding arrangement. As Sarah flipped through the contract documents, Sterling explained the board's reasoning. Your presentation demonstrated something we rarely see. A founder who has genuinely learned from early failures and built real expertise. Most importantly, you've proven that you can execute at small scale while developing systems that can work at large scale. Hartwell added, we were also impressed by your partnership strategy. Too many social entrepreneurs try to build everything themselves and fail because they lack crucial expertise. You've identified your strengths and found partners to fill the gaps. The meeting continued for another hour as the board members outlined their expectations and Sarah asked questions about reporting requirements and milestone definitions. By the end, Sarah had a clear understanding of what success would look like and what resources she would have to achieve it. Walking back to her car, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. After 2 years of rejection and struggle, she suddenly had more funding than she had ever imagined possible. The little invention she had developed in her cramped apartment was about to become a global operation, serving millions of people. That evening, Sarah sat in her studio apartment, staring at the contract documents spread across her kitchen table, the same table where she had thrown her folder in frustration after the country club. Humiliation now held agreements that would transform her life and the lives of countless people around the world. She thought about calling her parents, her few close friends, anyone who had supported her during the difficult months of rejection and self-doubt. But first she wanted to process the magnitude of what had happened and what it would require of her going forward. Sarah realized that securing the funding was just the beginning. Now she had to prove that she could deliver on every promise she had made to the Meridian board. She would need to hire staff, manage international operations, coordinate with dozens of partners, and scale her technology to reach hundreds of thousands of people within 18 months. The responsibility felt enormous. But Sarah had learned something crucial during her months of struggle and preparation. She wasn't the same naive inventor who had been humiliated at the country club. She had developed genuine business skills, built meaningful partnerships, and created systems that could support large-scale operations. Over the next few days, Sarah began the process of transforming from a struggling entrepreneur to the CEO of a well-funded social enterprise. She registered her company officially, opened business banking accounts, and began reaching out to potential employees and advisors. The first person she hired was Maria Santos, the community leader from Guatemala, who had become an expert in operating and maintaining the water purification systems. Maria would lead community engagement and training across all international operations, bringing the grassroots expertise that would be crucial to the company's success. Sarah also began looking for office space that could accommodate rapid growth. After 2 years of working from her apartment and borrowed conference rooms, the prospect of having a real headquarters felt surreal. But even as Sarah embraced her new reality, she never forgot the lessons learned during her months of rejection and hardship. The humiliation at the country club had been painful, but it had ultimately made her stronger and more determined. Margaret's cruel dismissal had motivated Sarah to develop the business skills and strategic thinking that impressed the Meridian board. As Sarah signed the final funding documents, she realized that her success hadn't come despite the obstacles she had faced, but because of them. Every rejection had taught her something important about business. Every failure had highlighted areas where she needed to improve, and every humiliation had strengthened her resolve to prove her critics wrong. The scared, naive inventor who had been dismissed by Margaret Blackwell was gone. In her place stood a confident CEO with $75 million in funding and partnerships spanning 3 continents. Sarah had not just proven Margaret wrong, she had transformed herself into everything Margaret had claimed she could never become. 18 months later, Sarah Martinez stood on the stage of the International Water Summit in Geneva, Switzerland, addressing an audience of world leaders, corporate executives, and development experts. Behind her, a massive screen displayed real-time data from water purification installations across 12 countries, showing clean water flowing to over 800,000 people daily. The transformation had been remarkable. Aquatech Solutions now employed over 200 people across 4 continents, with regional offices in Guatemala City, Manila, Lagos, and Mumbai. Sarah had kept her promise to the Meridian board, exceeding every milestone they had set for expansion and impact. Clean water isn't just a humanitarian issue, Sarah told the summit audience. It's an economic catalyst that transforms entire communities. When children aren't sick from waterborne diseases, they attend school regularly. When women don't spend hours daily collecting unsafe water, they can participate in income-generating activities. When communities have reliable water access, businesses can develop and thrive. The audience included several familiar faces. David Chen from Meridian Industries sat in the front row, beaming with pride at the success of their investment. Victoria Sterling, the skeptical board member who had grilled Sarah mercilessly, was now one of Aquatech's most vocal advocates and had helped arrange additional funding from other corporate foundations. But the most satisfying presence in the audience was Margaret Blackwell, who had somehow managed to secure an invitation to the prestigious summit. Sarah had noticed her during the opening reception, looking uncomfortable and out of place among the international development experts and social entrepreneurs. After Sarah's keynote presentation, she was surrounded by potential partners, investors, and government officials interested in expanding Aquatech's operations to their countries. The conversations were sophisticated and substantive, focused on implementation strategies, sustainability models, and scalable impact. During a brief break between meetings, Margaret approached Sarah at the refreshment table. She looked older and less confident than she had at the country club, her usual air of superiority replaced by something that looked almost like nervousness. "Sarah, isn't it?" Margaret said, as if she might not remember their previous encounter. "I believe we met at the Grandview Country Club some time ago." "Congratulations on your remarkable success." Sarah smiled politely, remembering every detail of their humiliating first encounter. "Thank you, Margaret. Yes, I remember our conversation very clearly. You suggested I might be better suited for housekeeping work." Margaret's face flushed slightly. "Well, perhaps I was hasty in my assessment. You've certainly proven yourself quite capable." She gestured vaguely toward the summit program featuring Sarah's biography and achievements. "I had no idea you would accomplish something of this magnitude." "Neither did I, honestly," Sarah replied with genuine grace. "But that encounter taught me something valuable. It showed me that I needed to develop business skills to match my technical abilities. In a way, your criticism helped me become a better entrepreneur." Margaret seemed surprised by Sarah's measured response. She had clearly expected either gloating or hostility, not this calm acknowledgement of lessons learned. "I must admit I'm here representing our family foundation. We're looking to invest in water access projects, and your organization keeps being recommended as the most effective option." The irony was delicious, but Sarah maintained her professional composure. "I'd be happy to have our partnerships team send you information about our investment opportunities. We have several programs that might align with your foundation's goals." "Actually," Margaret continued, clearly struggling with the reversal of their positions, I was hoping we might discuss this more personally. Perhaps over dinner? I realize I may have misjudged your potential when we first met. Sarah considered the invitation. Part of her wanted to decline, to let Margaret experience the same dismissal she had once received. But Sarah had learned that success was better measured by impact than revenge. I appreciate the invitation, but I'm fully booked during the summit. However, our Geneva office can arrange a formal presentation for your foundation's board next month. Margaret nodded stiffly, clearly recognizing the professional brush-off. Of course, I understand you must be incredibly busy. She paused, then added quietly, I want you to know that I've learned something from watching your success. Perhaps breeding and connections aren't the only measures of potential after all. They certainly help, Sarah acknowledged diplomatically, but they're not everything. Determination, adaptability, and genuine commitment to solving real problems matter more than I think either of us realized back then. As Margaret walked away, Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions. The vindication was satisfying, but it felt less important than it would have 18 months earlier. She had moved beyond the need to prove Margaret wrong and into the much more fulfilling work of proving herself right. The summit continued, with Sarah participating in panel discussions about scaling social enterprises, sustainable development financing, and technology solutions for global challenges. She found herself advising other entrepreneurs who reminded her of her younger self, passionate, brilliant, but lacking the business skills needed to transform good ideas into lasting impact. On the final day of the summit, Sarah received the Global Water Leadership Award for her contributions to expanding clean water access worldwide. Standing at the podium holding the crystal trophy, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scared young woman who had been humiliated at the country club felt like a different person entirely. That version of Sarah had been naive about business, unprepared for rejection and devastated by criticism. The current Sarah had learned to anticipate challenges, build strategic partnerships, and turn setbacks into learning opportunities. But the core motivation remained the same, the desire to solve real problems for people who needed solutions. The technology that had started as a personal project in her studio apartment was now providing clean water to nearly 1 million people daily, with expansion plans that would reach 10 times that number within 5 years. After the ceremony, Sarah called Maria Santos, who was now Aquatech's Director of Community Partnerships, managing operations across Latin America. Maria, we just secured commitments for expansion into 6 new countries. Are you ready for another adventure? Maria's laughter came through clearly across the international connection. Sarah, when you first came to our village with your strange machine and big dreams, I thought you were a little crazy. Now I think maybe crazy is exactly what the world needs more of. That evening, Sarah sat in her hotel room overlooking Lake Geneva, reviewing plans for Aquatech's next phase of growth. The company that had started with a rejection at an exclusive country club was now positioned to become one of the world's leading providers of water access solutions. Sarah opened her laptop and began drafting an email to potential partners in Southeast Asia, where water scarcity was creating urgent needs for innovative solutions. As she worked, she smiled, thinking about Margaret's awkward approach and stiff acknowledgement of error. The most satisfying part wasn't Margaret's admission of being wrong. It was the realization that Margaret's opinion no longer mattered to Sarah's sense of success. The validation that truly counted came from the children in Guatemala, who had clean water to drink, the women in Nigeria who could start businesses instead of walking hours for water, and the communities around the world whose lives were improving because of solutions that had seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. Sarah had learned that the best revenge against those who underestimate you isn't proving them wrong. It's becoming so successful that their opinions become irrelevant. Margaret's cruel dismissal had stung deeply at the time, but it had ultimately been a gift that pushed Sarah to develop the skills and mindset needed for genuine success. As Sarah prepared for sleep, she felt grateful for every rejection, every failure, and every humiliation that had shaped her journey. Without the pain of being dismissed and underestimated, she might never have developed the determination and resilience that made her current success possible. Margaret Blackwell had meant to crush Sarah's dreams, but she had actually helped forge them into reality.